Imagine stepping onto a train in the late 1800s, the smell of coal, smoke in the air, the whistle echoing across the countryside. The seats were wooden, the windows rattled with every turn of the wheels. But then, something surprising happened. A porter walked past carrying a silver platter of steaming food, meals so unusual, so luxurious, or sometimes so humble that they defined what it meant to travel by rail in 19th century America. Back then, train travel wasn't just about getting from one place to another. It was an event, a test of endurance, a show of class, and sometimes a taste of home in the middle of nowhere. The meals served, and the ones passengers carried with them, tell a forgotten story about how Americans ate, lived, and dreamed during the golden age of railroads. In this video, we're counting down 10 hidden 19th century train journey meals that amazed passengers. Some were rich indulgences that could rival the finest restaurants of the time. Others were simple foods, packed by hand, that fueled working families heading west in search of a better life. Each one reveals a piece of history, not just about food, but about the culture, struggles, and aspirations of America on the move. So climb aboard, settle into your seat, and let's rediscover the meals that once rattled along the tracks of a nation being built. It may sound strange today, but one of the most prized meals you could order on a 19th century train was not steak, not chicken, but oysters. Yes, fresh oysters, served while the train roared through the countryside. In the mid to late 1800s, oysters were not considered a luxury food in America. In fact, they were cheap, abundant, and widely eaten by every class of society. Thanks to railroads, ice houses, and new preservation methods, oysters could be packed in barrels of ice and shipped hundreds of miles inland from the East Coast. Suddenly, passengers traveling through dusty plains or industrial towns could sit down in a dining car and order a platter of oysters on a half-shell, just as if they were dining in a coastal restaurant. For travelers, especially wealthy ones, this was a symbol of modern progress. The idea that fresh seafood could be enjoyed far from the ocean seemed almost magical. Oysters became a signature dish of early dining cars, showing off the railroad's ability to provide not just transportation, but comfort, elegance, and even luxury. For middle-class families who might never have traveled before, tasting oysters on a train was a memory they carried for life. But behind the novelty was a darker truth. Oyster beds along the East Coast were being over-harvested at alarming rates. By the end of the century, what had once been an everyday food was becoming scarce, expensive, and increasingly reserved for the wealthy. For many, those train journeys were the first and last time they would ever taste oysters so fresh. And while oysters showed off the railroad's flair for luxury, not every meal was about indulgence. Sometimes passengers found comfort in the most familiar, home-packed foods, like fried chicken wrapped in newspaper. Before the elegant dining cars, before silverware and white tablecloths, many train journeys in the 19th century began with something much simpler: fried chicken, lovingly wrapped in newspaper from home. Travel in the mid-1800s was unpredictable. Dining cars were not always available, and food stations along the route were unreliable, often offering expensive or poorly prepared meals. So families, especially those traveling long distances, packed their own provisions. Fried chicken became the perfect travel food. It could be made in advance, eaten cold, and wrapped in newspaper or cloth to stay fresh for hours. Mothers and grandmothers would rise early before a journey, frying chicken and tucking it into baskets alongside biscuits, hard-boiled eggs, and perhaps a jar of pickles. Fried chicken carried more than just nourishment. It carried the warmth of home. On crowded trains filled with strangers, the smell of crispy chicken often filled the car, sparking conversations and even shared meals among passengers. It became a symbol of family tradition, comfort, and resilience. For many travelers, it was also a practical way to avoid the steep prices of railroad food vendors. But there's another side to this story. Not everyone could afford even a simple fried chicken meal. Poorer travelers often went without, watching hungrily as others unwrapped their bundles of food. And in a way, fried chicken wrapped in newspaper symbolized the great divide between those who traveled with comfort and those who endured hunger along the rails. Yet as trains expanded and railroads sought to impress, home-packed baskets began to give way to something entirely new: lavish dining car menus featuring dishes like roast beef and rich gravies. When the first dining cars rolled onto the rails, one dish stood out above all the rest: A hearty plate of roast beef smothered in rich brown gravy, the very definition of luxury on the move. By the 1870s, railroads realized food wasn't just a necessity, it was part of the experience. The Pullman Company revolutionized train travel by introducing dining cars equipped with elegant tables, oil lamps, and uniformed waiters. Menus were designed to mimic fine hotel dining, and roast beef quickly became the star attraction. Served alongside mashed potatoes, seasonal vegetables, and thick gravy, it gave passengers a sense of refinement and comfort as the countryside sped past their windows. Roast beef was more than just a meal, it was a statement. For many passengers, especially those who had never dined in fancy hotels, eating roast beef on a moving train felt like stepping into another world. It reassured middle-class travelers that they were experiencing modern luxury, while wealthier passengers enjoyed the familiarity of a staple dish that carried connotations of status and tradition. It also symbolized stability. Even while crossing vast frontiers, people could still enjoy the same hearty meal they would at home. But the luxury came at a price. A single roast beef dinner in a dining car often cost what a laborer might earn in an entire day. For many, this meant sitting in the coach section with no dining privileges, smelling the savory aroma, but never tasting it. In this way, roast beef became both a comfort food and a reminder of the class divides that shaped 19th century travel. Of course, not every passenger could afford silver service and steaming gravy. For many, the best they could hope for was something portable, like a simple ham sandwich sold from a basket, right on the platform. Not every passenger dined on china plates with silver forks. For most travelers, the real taste of 19th century railroads came not from the dining car, but from a hurried ham sandwich wrapped in paper, bought right on the station platform. Before dining cars became widespread in the 1870s, passengers relied heavily on station stops for food. Vendors, often local women and children, would line the platforms with baskets of sandwiches, boiled eggs, fruit, and pie slices. The ham sandwich, cheap, filling, and easy to pack, became a staple for hungry travelers. These sandwiches were often simple. A thick cut of salty ham placed between two slices of bread, sometimes with a smear of mustard or butter if the vendor was feeling generous. For everyday passengers, these sandwiches weren't just a snack, they were survival. Tickets alone were costly, and dining car meals were out of reach for most working-class families. A nickel or a dime could buy a ham sandwich that filled the stomach for hours. They also carried a sense of community. Each station had its own vendors, and passengers came to anticipate their favorite stops where the bread might be fresher, the ham thicker, or the price a little fairer. But not all sandwiches were as wholesome as they seemed. Many vendors cut corners, using stale bread or questionable cuts of meat. In fact, the term ham sandwich became something of a joke in railroad lore, shorthand for the cheapest, roughest food a traveler could expect. Yet for countless Americans, it was a taste forever tied to the thrill of train travel, eaten quickly before the whistle blew and the wheels rolled on. And while the ham sandwich fed the masses, those who splurged inside the dining car sometimes discovered something more refined, like a steaming bowl of turtle soup, once considered the height of culinary elegance. It might sound strange today, but in the 19th century, turtle soup wasn't just food, it was a symbol of sophistication. And for those who could afford it, a train ride offered the chance to sip one of America's most elite delicacies while barreling across the countryside. Turtle soup, especially made from green sea turtles, was a prized dish in Victorian America. Imported from the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, turtles were transported alive to ensure freshness, sometimes weighing hundreds of pounds. Hotels, luxury restaurants, and, yes, first-class train dining cars proudly served turtle soup to wealthy travelers. Recipes often included sherry, herbs, and long-simmered turtle meat, creating a thick, savory broth that symbolized fine dining at its peak. For passengers of means, ordering turtle soup wasn't just about filling the stomach, it was about status. To sip turtle soup on the rails was to demonstrate wealth, refinement, and the ability to enjoy high-class cuisine even while in motion. It reflected the idea that train travel itself was a luxury experience, with meals that rivaled those of the finest city hotels. But turtle soup had a darker side. The booming demand for turtle meat during the 19th century led to the near decimation of green sea turtle populations. What was once an abundant resource in American waters became scarce by the early 20th century. Today, turtle soup has vanished from mainstream dining tables, its legacy remembered as both a delicacy of the Gilded Age and a cautionary tale of overindulgence. Of course, not every luxury traveler wanted soup. For many, nothing felt more civilized than sitting down to a proper roast chicken dinner, complete with all the trimmings, right there on the train. As the train rattled down the tracks, some passengers sat not with a paper-wrapped sandwich in their hands, but with a knife and fork, enjoying a full roast chicken dinner. Proof that the Iron Horse could carry not only people, but elegance itself. By the 1870s, luxury railroads like the Pullman Company had introduced dining cars that rivaled fine restaurants. Roast chicken quickly became one of the signature offerings. It was hearty, familiar, and easy for cooks to prepare in the cramped kitchens of a moving train. Served with potatoes, gravy, and seasoned vegetables, the meal offered a comforting taste of home in an otherwise transient journey. Roast chicken dinners symbolized stability and tradition in an era of rapid change. For weary travelers, they provided more than nourishment. They created a sense of comfort and dignity. Imagine settling into a white linen-covered table, chandeliers above, silverware polished, and being served a golden roast chicken while the countryside blurred past your window. For many, it was a moment that made train travel feel not only convenient, but truly grand. But luxury came with a price. A roast chicken dinner could cost as much as a day's wages for a working-class American. For most, these elegant meals were glimpsed only through glowing advertisements or from the doorway of a dining car they could not afford. The roast chicken became a symbol of both aspiration and exclusion, a dish remembered fondly by some, but never tasted by others. Still, whether you dined in elegance or grabbed something cheap at a station stop, one thing united all travelers: the joy of a sweet treat. And few desserts were as beloved on the rails as a simple slice of pie. For many 19th century travelers, no train journey felt complete without a slice of pie. Apple, cherry, or mince, it wasn't just dessert. It was a taste of home served on a moving table of steel. Pies were a staple of American dining long before railroads, and their popularity carried naturally into dining cars. Train chefs often baked pies daily, filling the air with the smell of cinnamon and butter that drifted down the narrow carriages. They were made with seasonal fruit or dried fillings that traveled well, such as raisins or apples. For passengers, a slice of pie on the rails felt both familiar and indulgent, reminding them of kitchens and family tables they had left behind. Pie was more than just a dessert. It was an equalizer. Unlike turtle soup or roast chicken, a slice of pie was relatively affordable, making it one of the few treats accessible to both wealthy and middle-class travelers. The ritual of enjoying pie while watching the American landscape roll by became one of the most nostalgic dining experiences of early train travel. Newspapers of the time even noted how travelers compared dining cars based on the quality of their pies. But pie on the rails also carried a bittersweet truth. Some dining cars cut costs by using cheap ingredients, swapping butter for lard or stretching fruit fillings with flour and sugar. Passengers never quite knew if they were about to taste something heavenly or barely edible. Yet even with these inconsistencies, the pie became an enduring symbol of warmth and hospitality aboard America's railroads. And while a sweet slice of pie was a comfort, some rail journeys offered something far more unusual: a seafood delicacy that seemed almost impossible to serve on a moving train: oysters. It may sound unbelievable today, but in the late 19th century, some first-class train passengers dined not on simple sandwiches or stews, but on oysters, served fresh on the rails as though they were in a seaside restaurant. During the 1800s, oysters were not the rare luxury they are today. Thanks to abundant oyster beds along the East Coast and advancements in preservation, they were cheap, plentiful, and wildly popular. Railroads capitalized on this craze, transporting barrels of oysters packed in ice to inland cities and even serving them directly on dining cars. Passengers in first-class dining rooms might order oysters on a half-shell, fried oysters, or even oyster stew, delicacies once thought impossible to enjoy so far from the coast. Oysters represented modernity and abundance. To sit on a moving train in Kansas or Ohio and eat seafood that had been pulled from the Atlantic just days earlier was nothing short of astonishing. It showed the power of railroads to shrink distances and deliver luxuries once confined to specific regions. Oysters became a marker of refinement, a meal that connected travelers to the grand dining culture of America's growing cities. But oyster dining on trains carried risks. Preservation was not always perfect, and spoiled oysters could turn a refined dinner into a nightmarish illness. Newspapers of the time occasionally reported outbreaks of railroad stomach, leaving passengers sick from bad seafood. Still, for those who took the risk, oysters on the rails were a thrill, a story to tell, a memory of luxury that felt almost magical. Of course, not every dish on the rails was about extravagance. For some, the most comforting taste of a long journey came in the form of a simple, steaming bowl of beef stew. Not every passenger dined on oysters and turtle soup. For the everyday American, one dish defined train travel: a humble, hearty bowl of beef stew. Beef stew was a practical staple of railroad dining. It required inexpensive cuts of meat, slow-cooked with potatoes, onions, and carrots, ingredients that were easy to store and prepare on a moving train. In the cramped dining car kitchens, stew was efficient, filling, and forgiving of rough conditions. For passengers who couldn't afford high-class meals, it was often the cheapest hot option on the menu, making it the lifeblood of working-class travelers moving across America. Stew carried more than flavor. It carried familiarity. For farmers, workers, and immigrants, it tasted like something they might have made at home, simmering on a family stove. The aroma of a pot of stew drifting down the train car gave comfort to passengers far from home, offering warmth and sustenance during long and uncertain journeys. It was also a social meal. Big pots meant multiple servings, often shared quickly during short dining stops. Yet beef stew on the rails wasn't always the cozy dish people hoped for. Complaints from travelers described stews that were watery, oversalted, or stretched with too many potatoes and too little meat. In some cases, passengers joked that the mystery meat in their stew was unidentifiable. Still, despite the uneven quality, beef stew became the great equalizer of railroad food. Affordable, filling, and forever tied to the memory of long train journeys. And while stew fed the working class, another dish catered to passengers who wanted to indulge in comfort with a touch of elegance: a plate of golden, pan-fried trout. Imagine gazing out the train window at winding rivers and mountain streams, then being served a freshly pan-fried trout, cooked right in the dining car's tiny kitchen. For 19th century travelers, it wasn't just a meal, it was an experience. As railroads pushed westward, dining cars often highlighted regional specialties to impress passengers. Trout, abundant in rivers across the Appalachians and Rockies, became a celebrated dish on certain lines. Train chefs would pan-fry the fish in butter, seasoning it simply with salt, pepper, and lemon. Some luxury trains even arranged for fresh trout to be delivered at station stops along the route, ensuring the fish reached diners at its peak freshness. Pan-fried trout represented the romance of American expansion. For travelers moving westward, it connected the meal on their table to the very landscapes they were passing. Eating trout on the rails wasn't just about taste. It was about storytelling. It gave passengers the sense that they were experiencing the bounty of the frontier without ever leaving their velvet-lined seats. For wealthier travelers, it also reinforced the idea that train journeys could rival fine resort vacations. But behind the elegance was struggle. Preparing delicate fish in a swaying train kitchen was no easy task. Chefs often worked in sweltering, cramped spaces, and a misturn in the pan could ruin an expensive dish. There were also stories of less-than-fresh fish being passed off as local catches, disappointing those who expected mountain trout and received something far less appealing. Still, for many who did get the real thing, pan-fried trout on the rails became a meal to remember, a taste of the frontier served on fine china. And while trout represented the romance of the wilderness, there was another dish that reflected pure indulgence: thick, juicy steaks sizzling on the rails. Picture this: the rhythmic clatter of wheels on the tracks, the smell of a perfectly seared steak drifting down the aisle, and a waiter in crisp white gloves presenting your meal like you were dining at a five-star hotel. By the late 19th century, luxury railroads weren't just about moving people from city to city. They were about selling an experience. And nothing said luxury quite like a steak dinner. Prime cuts of beef, often sourced from the expanding cattle industry in the Midwest, became a centerpiece of dining car menus. Trains like the Santa Fe and Union Pacific built reputations around serving thick, juicy steaks with all the trimmings: potatoes, gravy, and fresh rolls. For many Americans, a steak dinner on a train was their first taste of true fine dining. Steak dinners symbolized both prosperity and progress. Passengers felt they were part of something grand, that modern travel could bring the luxuries of elite city restaurants to the middle of nowhere. It reassured travelers that they weren't just moving across great distances, they were doing so in style. This mattered especially to businessmen and wealthier families, who saw steak on the menu as proof that railroads took their prestige seriously. But not everyone got the glamorous version. In less prestigious trains, the steak might be a thinner cut, overcooked in a tiny galley kitchen. Some passengers even complained that the beef was so tough, it was like chewing leather as the train lurched. Yet for those on the better lines, steak dinners became a bragging point, a story to tell friends back home. We dined on steak while racing through the desert at 60 miles an hour. And while steak symbolized strength and status, there was another dish that spoke to comfort and tradition, a slice of pie baked right on the rails. Imagine traveling across endless prairies, and just as the whistle blows, the sweet smell of apple pie fills the car, baked not in a small-town kitchen, but in the galley of a moving train. By the 1880s, railroads had discovered that pie wasn't just dessert, it was nostalgia on a plate. Dining cars began to hire cooks skilled in baking so that passengers could enjoy warm pies, often apple, cherry, or custard, made fresh during the journey. With ovens specially fitted to small train kitchens, staff managed to roll dough, prepare fillings, and bake right on the tracks. For passengers traveling far from home, a slice of pie brought comfort and a reminder of family tables they had left behind. Pie represented more than food, it represented tradition. As America expanded westward, settlers longed for familiar tastes that connected them to their roots. Railroads capitalized on this, advertising fresh-baked pies daily to lure travelers. For many, biting into a warm slice during a journey through rough landscapes made the train feel less like a mechanical invention and more like a moving home. It was a reminder that even on the frontier, civilization and comfort was never far away. But pie wasn't always perfect. Some passengers discovered fillings made from canned fruit instead of fresh, and rumors spread of cooks reusing crust to save time. Still, the idea of a pie baked on a train was so unusual and heartwarming that few complained. For many, it was less about flavor and more about the story. We ate pie as the Rockies rolled past our window. And if dessert was the taste of home, then breakfast on the rails offered a promise of the future, with eggs and bacon sizzling at sunrise as the locomotive pushed west. Picture this, dawn breaking over the plains, the whistle of the locomotive in the distance, and inside the dining car, the unmistakable crackle of bacon hitting a hot pan. Breakfast was the anchor of 19th century train dining. By the 1870s, railroads understood that the first meal of the day could set the tone for an entire journey. Passengers waking from overnight trips wanted something hearty, and nothing symbolized American comfort food like eggs and bacon. Cooks would rise early, preparing enormous quantities of bacon and scrambling dozens of eggs on stoves designed to work even while the train rattled across uneven tracks. This meal was more than just fuel. It was ritual. Sitting in a polished dining car, sipping coffee while watching the sun rise through the windows, passengers felt part of something bigger. The merging of old traditions with new frontiers. For working men, farmers, and even businessmen traveling west, bacon and eggs offered reassurance. It was the same breakfast they knew from home, served in an entirely new setting, a kitchen rolling at 40 miles an hour. But there was a hidden detail that surprised many. Railroad bacon often wasn't the fresh cuts found in local butcher shops. Instead, much of it came salted or smoked, preserved to withstand long trips and limited refrigeration. The eggs, too, were sometimes pickled or stored in lime water to last weeks. Yet when paired together and served steaming hot with a cup of black coffee, few passengers cared. To them, it was a taste of familiarity in an unfamiliar world. And as the day rolled on, the meals didn't just stay simple. Some journeys offered a touch of elegance, with multi-course feasts that felt more like fine dining than frontier travel. Imagine stepping onto a train in the middle of nowhere and being handed a menu that looked more like it belonged in a five-star hotel than a moving rail car. By the late 19th century, the great railroads of America weren't just about speed. They were about status. Dining cars became showcases of luxury, designed to impress wealthy travelers and lure upper-class clientele. Dinner often followed a strict multi-course format. Soup, fish, roast meats, vegetables, bread, dessert, and coffee. Some trains even employed French-trained chefs, turning iron stoves into miniature gourmet kitchens. For many, This was their first encounter with fine dining, and the experience was unforgettable. Multi-course meals transformed the perception of train travel. What had once been an uncomfortable, dusty ride across the countryside became an adventure filled with elegance. These dinners symbolized refinement in an era when most Americans were still eating simple meals at home. Passengers could order oysters shipped in from the East Coast, followed by prairie chicken, roast beef, or trout caught along the train's route. Each meal told a story of abundance, mobility, and the new possibilities of a connected nation. Yet beneath the glamour, the contrast was stark. While wealthy passengers feasted on lavish dinners, many immigrants, laborers, and soldiers riding in cheaper cars had to make do with cold bread and salted pork packed from home. The dining car was more than a place to eat. It was a stage that revealed America's growing divide between rich and poor. For some, the journey was about survival. For others, it was about spectacle. And after such extravagant meals, passengers often longed for something sweet, a dessert that could comfort them as the train rocked gently into the night. As the train wheels clicked along the tracks, the final course brought passengers a taste of home, sweet pies and creamy custards that reminded them of family kitchens left far behind. Dessert on 19th century trains was more than just a treat. It was a comfort in motion. Pies, apple, cherry, and mince were staples of American dining, easily baked ahead and stored for the journey. Custards, often flavored with nutmeg or cinnamon, added a soft and delicate finish to meals that otherwise featured heavy meats and breads. These sweets were carefully prepared in cramped train kitchens, where chefs had to balance baking temperatures while the car swayed along uneven tracks. For passengers, desserts like pies and custards provided a sense of tradition and stability in a rapidly changing world. As America industrialized and expanded westward, the familiar flavors of pie crust or vanilla custard grounded travelers in the comfort of something known and loved. Offering dessert wasn't just about indulgence. It was a way for railroads to show refinement and attention to detail, proving that dining on the rails could rival the best hotels in the country. But here's the surprising part. While passengers enjoyed delicate slices of pie on porcelain plates, many train workers who prepared the meals weren't allowed to eat them. Porters and cooks, often African-American staff working long hours for low pay, had to scrape by with leftovers or go hungry altogether. The dessert that symbolized comfort for some only deepened the hardship for others, highlighting the inequalities hidden behind silver serving trays. And so, from oysters to pies, train dining in the 19th century captured both the elegance and contradictions of a nation on the move. But what these meals really represented was more than food. They were symbols of progress, class, and the promise of America's future. If you enjoyed this journey back in time, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss another story of the America we remember. Until next time, keep the past alive, one forgotten story at a time.